So we have been talking about refuge, and in the presentation of refuge in the lamrim, we see that the information is organized under 4 subheadings. From those 4 subheadings, today we will deal with the 4th one, which is the benefit. In terms of the benefits of going for refuge, if we look in more extensive texts such as Lamrim Chenmo, the great exposition of the stages of the path, we will see a very extensive list of benefits there. However, those benefits of going for refuge can be summarized into a list of 8, and therefore the presentation today will be based on the standard presentation of 8 benefits. So when we begin talking about the benefits of going for refuge, the first one is that you become a Buddhist by taking refuge. So it's important to understand what we mean with this expression, I'm a Buddhist or I become a Buddhist. Being a Buddhist is not something that is determined through the society that you live in, the household you live in, whether your parents are Buddhist or not. So being a Buddhist is determined on whether you go for refuge to the 3 jewels by having sincere faith in these objects of refuge. The other important thing in terms of refuge is that it should not just be a mere recitation. So it should not just be empty words coming out of your mouth. Rather, refuge refer to a particular way of thinking. We have already talked about the way of thinking in order to go for refuge. But to present this again, to summarize this again, first of all, we have spent some time thinking in a way that will allow us to set in place the causes for going for refuge. And once those causes for going for refuge are complete, the next thing that we do is that we totally entrust ourselves to the 3 jewels. So by having that very strong thought in our mind, then there is a particular way that we feel. And when you have a strong feeling, this actually is usually expressed through your physical and verbal activities as well. So to give you an example, when you're really angry, this is demonstrated, or this manifests through the way that you move, and also usually through the words that come out of your mouth. So there is physical and verbal expression of whatever feeling, strong feeling we have. So here we are talking about having the strong feeling of reliance upon the objects of refuge. So internally, we have that way of thinking, and then physically, we prostrate, and verbally, we recite the formula for going for refuge. Okay, we're looking into the second benefit of going for refuge, and this is that refuge becomes the basis of all the vows. So we know that if we engage in any type of ritual, the first thing that we do is we go for refuge. But especially if we take any vows, first of all, the first step is to take refuge. Only after we have taken refuge, we continue by requesting and assuming the vows. And therefore, in that sense, we can say that refuge is like the foundation, is like the ground, like the earth under our feet. So you know that when the ground is stable, all sorts of things can be supported by that ground. So our buildings are supported from a stable ground. The environment around us, like the mountains or the flowers or the trees and things like that, they all grow from and they are supported from a stable ground. If the ground was not stable, all those things could not abide, could not exist above the ground. So similar thing with having refuge. So we say that refuge becomes the basis of vows. There are different types and different classes of vows. We have vows of individual liberation, bodhisattva vows, and tantric vows. In terms of vows of individual liberation, we have the vows of the ordained. So, for example, for the monks, we have the Getsul and the Gelon, which are the two levels of ordination. For lay people, we have vows of individual liberation that can be the lay practitioner's vows for the duration of the life, or lay practitioner vows for the duration of one day. Then, in addition to that, the next step of vows are the bodhisattva vows. So those who practice the Mahayana and those who have received initiation definitely have received the bodhisattva vows. If you have been present in any initiation, it means you have received the bodhisattva vows. And the thing is that if you do not have refuge, you cannot take any vows. And if you cannot take vows, there is no initiation taking place. Then, in addition to the bodhisattva vows, if we look at the Yoga Tantra and highest Yoga Tantra, we have tantric vows. Again, tantric vows, in order to receive the tantric vows, first of all, you have to go for refuge. And then, having gone for refuge, you can receive all those additional higher level of vows. Therefore, for all types of vows, individual liberation, bodhisattva, tantric vows, we see that refuge becomes the foundation, just as the ground underneath is the foundation for the mountains, the trees, the buildings, and so forth. So the refuge becomes the foundation. Without refuge, there will be no vows. So we said that taking refuge is the basis, the foundation for taking the vows. But even after having taken vows, the quality of your refuge affects the quality of your vows. So the quality of your refuge really is indicated here through the faith that you have in the three jewels. And if your faith in the three jewels declines, your vows will also decline. So it is similar to, let's say, having the ground that has become unstable through an earthquake or something like this. And we know if an earthquake happens, it destabilizes anything that is above it, such as the houses, the buildings collapse as well. So if your faith in the three jewels and your refuge declines, the vows will also decline. We continue now with the third benefit. The third benefit of taking refuge is that previously accumulated karmic obscurations and negativities will be removed. So Rinpoche was saying that he has introduced the story of this prince who was very eager to resume power. And in order to do this, he killed his father. By killing his father, he became a king. But his father was actually a very advanced practitioner. He was a very high Arya being. He was at the verge of becoming an Arhat. So we know that killing the father, killing one's own father, is one of the deeds of immediate retribution, meaning that the prince who killed the father, due to that act of killing, immediately in his next life was going to be reborn in the hell of Avicii. The hell of Avicii is the hell without respite, is the hardest hell, and also the duration of that hell is the longest. And because also the father had such high attainments, the negativity was even greater. So through such an action, he accumulated the karma of to be reborn in the hell without respite. However, by taking refuge, he purified that karma. Okay, so we say that one of the great benefits is the benefit of purifying negativity. There are different ways we can purify negativity. We know, for example, that by reciting the names of the Tathagatas, with the right attitude, that has the power of purification. So we have the practice of confession to the 35 Buddhas, in which we recite the names of each one of those Buddhas. And another case is to, for example, to recite the name or the name mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha, Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Soha. Now, on one hand, there is actually no difference in the amount of qualities or compassion amongst the different Buddhas. However, from our side, we have a closer connection. We have a very special connection with Shakyamuni Buddha, and therefore reciting the name of Shakyamuni Buddha, having faith, having respect, and engaging in practices in relation to Shakyamuni Buddha, this can have the great effect of accumulating virtue and purifying our negativity due to the special connection. So we just mentioned here that there can be special purification if we do practices in relation to Buddha Shakyamuni because we have a special karmic connection with Buddha Shakyamuni. And this issue of having a special karmic connection is something very important, is something to pay attention to. Rinpoche was saying there are many stories, such as, for example, the story we gave before with the king, and so forth, that they appear in the sutras. Sometimes it just, these are very interesting stories, but it takes quite a lot of time in the teaching, and we have limited time for our class. So just quickly, there is another story that comes in the sutra. These are true stories. These things actually happen. There was a bodhisattva that was called, his name translates as the one who was always crying. And he relied on his guru, who was another bodhisattva, the bodhisattva Chirpa. So the first bodhisattva, the student bodhisattva always crying, actually had the great fortune to have met hundreds of thousands of Buddhas, having received teachings from hundreds of thousands of Buddhas, having venerated hundreds and thousands of Buddhas. However, when he met his teacher, the Bodhisattva Chirpa, he practiced in a different way. His practice has different intensity. He sacrificed his life and health and practiced in a way that it is said that within 6 or 7 years, he obtained the 7th ground of a bodhisattva. So this is something that is astonishing, because to be able to progress from the path of accumulation to the 7th ground of the bodhisattva is something that usually takes a number of lifetimes. So to be able to do it within 6 or 7 years, this is an incredible, a very strong indication of that this was the result of a very close karmic connection with his teacher. So as we say, there's no difference from the side of the Buddhas in terms of some of the Buddhas having more qualities or more compassion or taking more interest in us. There's no difference whatsoever from their side. However, from our side, there is the difference in terms of with whom we have a special karmic connection. So we say that one of the fourth benefit is that by taking refuge, you will easily accumulate vast amount of merits. So, of course, this means that you must have good quality causes of refuge, having established the causes for refuge properly, and then having established refuge properly when you practice with faith, then you can accumulate a great amount of virtue. So in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, it is said that if that merit of going for refuge were to take the aspect of form, so if it were a material object, the 3 realms will be too small to accommodate it. In other words, it says that if it were to become form, if it were to become matter, it will be so vast that the space could not hold it, could not accumulate it. So on one hand, we talk about creating vast amount of merit, but on the other hand, we should know that there is always the shortcoming of destroying that merit. And the way that we do this is usually through generating anger or other strong afflictions, such as, for example, jealousy and so forth. These arise very easily in our mind, and therefore we're very susceptible. Master Shantideva in the Bodhisattva's Ways of Life has said that virtue accumulated over hundreds of thousands of eons can easily be destroyed in an instant when we generate anger. So he's talking about the great faults of anger, the great power, the destructive power of anger that can destroy such great amount of virtue in just a second. So it says there either 100 or 1,000 eons, because it depends towards whom you generate that anger. If you generate anger towards someone who is equal to yourself or someone who is inferior to yourself in terms of qualities, then in an instant you generate virtue accumulated over 100 eons. But if you generate anger towards someone who is a really advanced practitioner, then the merit you destroyed in an instant is the merit accumulated over 1,000 eons. So we know that anger is, for that reason, a very dangerous affliction. It destroys our merit, but also it destroys our peace of mind. We cannot relax when we have anger. As they say, there is no negativity like anger. It is the strongest, it is the worst that there is. This is something that is stated many times in the sutras. Today, Rinpoche said, I just mention a couple of instances from the Bodhisattva's Ways of Life and also from the Middle Way text. However, those of you who pay attention and are interested in those subjects, in this subject, you should know that you can find many references, authentic references in the scriptures. So we're talking now about the fifth benefit of going for refuge, and this is that humans and non-humans will not be able to harm you. So the reason why this happens is because if you properly go for refuge, you purify a lot of negativity and you accumulate a lot of merit. So, of course, you can see, how this can have, it almost has a protective value for yourself. Now, there is one story in the lamrim that Rinpoche would like to relate. There was a monk who had a benefactor, and the benefactor gifted the monk some cloth to make robes. But there was a thief who knew that the monk had received these cloths. So he decided to go there at night and steal the cloth. So he arrived and he put his hand through the window of the monk, and he was trying to reach for the cloth. But the monk actually caught the thief's hand, and then he had a stick, and he started hitting the thief on his hand. And with every strike of the stick, he was saying, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha. And then finally, the thief managed to pull away his hand, and he escaped, and he ran off into the night. He took refuge under a bridge, but that area was an area that was frequented by many ghosts and spirits, so it was not a safe location. So the thief was sitting there under the bridge, and he was saying, he said, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha. Thank goodness there were only 3 objects of refuge. If there were 4 or 5, I would have died tonight from all the beating. So as he was saying these words, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha, he had no idea what he was reciting. And of course, he had no faith. And we can see by the way he used this phrase, because he was saying, thank goodness there were no more than three, right? That he didn't understand at all the objects of refuge. He had no concept of refuge. However, merely by saying those words, I go for refuge to the Guru, to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, that night he was protected and there were no ghosts in the bridge where he stayed. So we'll continue with the sixth benefit, which is if you go for refuge, you will not fall into the lower migrations. I think this is, again, easy to understand how this would happen, because by going for refuge properly, you accumulate merit and you purify negativity. Now, there is something that we need to address here, because in many traditional societies, definitely in Tibet, but in other places where the Buddhist teachings are, proliferate and have spread, there is an attitude that says that refuge and teachings on the law of cause and effect, the karma, and so forth are very basic. And people are always on the lookout for something which is higher, something which is more interesting, something that goes above those things. So you often hear people say, isn't there any better or any higher teaching? Isn't this Lama giving any better teaching than refuge and bodhicitta? However, than refuge and karma. However, it is important to understand that for us, at the level that we are at, refuge and the law of karma are the most important things to comprehend and to establish as a sound basis, a sound foundation. They are easy for us to understand. They are easy for us to practice. So, for example, we can recite very easily the verse for going for refuge. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and so forth. And therefore, they're very appropriate for our level. When Master Atisha went to Tibet, he emphasized very much teachings on refuge and the law of cause and effect. He didn't give publicly initiations. There are no accounts of Master Atisha giving initiations to a large number of people. Of course, he did it. He did it very discreetly to, just one or two people at the time. And for that reason, the Tibetans started referring to Atisha with the derogative term of the refuge Lama or the karma Lama. But Master Atisha said, I don't care if they call me this name. And actually, by calling me with this name, this will be of benefit for the Buddhist teachings. So Rinpoche was saying, I think that what is important here to comprehend from these stories, from this account, is that it is very good to make sure that you have a firm foundation at the level where you are, and do not try to overreach, always aspiring for some, lofty teachings and advanced teachings and so forth. By all means, I am not saying do not take initiations. I'm not saying do not take jenangs and blessings and so forth. There are a lot of people who just by attending an initiation or a jenang, merely by hearing the words, they receive very strong imprints. So for them, it is very beneficial. But what I want to say is that if you keep in mind that analogy of having stable ground, and then the house that you build on that ground is also going to be stable because it will have stable foundation, make sure that your foundation of refuge is stable and do not try to overreach from the very beginning. So we'll continue with the seventh benefit of taking refuge, which is that you will effortlessly accomplish your temporary and your ultimate purpose. So we have a mention in the King of Samadhi Sutra, where Ananda has a conversation with the Buddha, and the Buddha says to Ananda that whatever virtue you create in relation to the Buddha, even if you did not have a particular wish or motivation, nevertheless, it becomes the cause for liberation and omniscience. So this is actually a remarkable statement by the Buddha. The reason for that is because it's not easy for the root of virtue that we create to automatically or easily become the cause for liberation and omniscience. Those of you who have studied the lamrim, I'm sure you have heard this before. In order for your virtue to become the cause for your liberation, you must be influenced by the mind of renunciation when you are performing the activity. And also, in order for your virtue to become the cause for omniscience, you must be influenced by bodhicitta. If you're not influenced by those particular sets of minds, the virtue you create does not become the cause for liberation or the cause for omniscience. If you engage in virtuous activities without having these specific motivations, then these virtuous activities become the causes for you to remain within cyclic existence. So let's say you are born as a human or a god. If you engage in non-virtuous activities, obviously without any good motivation, then it remains to be seen what sort of result will eventuate from that. So it is very important to understand here that any virtue you create in terms of the Buddha, and although the statement mentions the Buddha, it equally applies to the Buddha, to the Dharma, to the Sangha, to all three objects of refuge. And in terms of virtue here, it can refer to generating faith or meeting images of the Buddha, or venerating, prostrating to them, going for refuge to them, and so forth. So how is it that this happens? Because from our side, our mind is weak. Our mind does not have the proper motivation. It does not have the power to create sufficient or to make the virtue to become the cause for liberation and enlightenment. So the answer to that is that we rely upon the power of the field. So the objects of refuge are a very powerful field. So any virtuous activity we do in relation to them, so circumambulate them, go for refuge, have faith towards them, venerate them, and so forth, eventually creates the causes for liberation and omniscience. So this is the instruction, which means instruction here means it's a very skillful and powerful means for us. Okay, we continue with the last one, the eighth of those benefits, which is you will quickly become enlightened. And we can just present this in a very concise manner. It is obvious if you create a vast amount of virtue very quickly, it means, again, in your future lives, you will obtain a human rebirth. Again, in the future, you will have the opportunity to meet with the Buddhist teachings. And by practicing in this way, you will quickly create the causes and you proceed to the state of liberation and Buddhahood. So, having presented those 8 benefits of going for refuge, it is very important to bring those in mind every time that we engage in any types of practice and virtuous activity that we do. Recitations, meditations, circumambulations, presenting offerings, and so forth. All right, so more in this presentation, there is one more subject that we need to discuss in terms of refuge, which is advice after having gone for refuge. Also, Rinpoche would like to go over the material as it is usually done, that you do a revision, a quick revision of all the material you have presented. Of course, there has been for a number of days, for a number of classes, there has been a presentation here of all the main key points of refuge. And I think we have some certainty now about the key points of going for refuge. But the important thing here, the main question, the burning question is, how do you actually do it? How do you do it? How do you go for refuge? And Rinpoche would like to explain in terms of personal practice how this is done. Of course, we have a very extensive and detailed presentation of the objects of refuge or the visualization of the field of refuge and so forth. But we will not go into this presentation tonight. And I think that what is the most important thing is to come to understand how you perform meditation on the body of the Buddha. This is a subject that Rinpoche said I have touched on it before, but in a very concise way. I was in a hurry, but I think it is very important to go through this. So once I will be explaining how to perform this meditation on the body of the Buddha, we have to always bring into mind the benefits, the great benefits of going for refuge. So there is a particular quotation from the King of Samadhi Sutra that says that if you continuously meditate and become familiar with the visualizing the object of the body of the Buddha through this familiarity, then when the time of suffering, sickness or illness or even death arises, when you're sick and unwell, and when you have the experience of suffering, of dying, then you will not lose this recollection of the Buddha. And your experience of suffering will not take away that image, that visualization of the Buddha. And this is a very crucial point. It's actually when we come to a time of suffering, illness, sickness, very difficult situation, when there is nothing else, the most important thing for us is really to be able to visualize the body of the Buddha. This creates the causes for us to meet the Buddhas again and the Buddhist teachings again in our future lives, and also allows our mind to be relaxed. Therefore, it is very important practice. So Rinpoche will explain how to do this. So listen and reflect on the benefits of going for refuge. Okay, so let's begin with the presentation of this. First of all, if you're going to engage in this visualization, you have to sit. So many times we hear about the sitting posture, like the 7 points of Vairochana, or having to sit in with the legs fully crossed position and so forth. However, it is important to sit in a manner that suits you best. So perhaps sitting in the full lotus position is just too severe for your legs. If you need to stretch your legs, if you need to sit on a chair, by all means do that. You should sit in a way and in a position that is comfortable to you. So sit in a way that you usually sit for some activity. And therefore, the position of the legs is not a crucial point. It's not as important. What is important is that your sitting posture is straight. Because if you're not sitting straight, if you are hunching up, if you're leaning over, this brings about lethargy, which is obviously something that we want to avoid. So whether you're sitting on a chair, whether you're sitting on the floor, however you're sitting, make sure you're sitting straight. Then The next thing is the position of the head. Make sure your head is not leaning backwards, so you're not looking up in the sky, let's say, right? No, you're not looking like that. But instead, the head should be slightly bent forward, downwards, slightly, not much. Then in terms of your tongue, it is very good if the tongue were to turn and touch the upper palate. But when we say the tongue touches the upper palate, just place it there naturally. So do not think that you have to express to put some pressure on your palate with your tongue. You're not doing anything like that. So your teeth, your tongue, your lips, all of those things should be in their natural position. Do not force anything. Then it is important, the position of the eyes are important. If you're going to meditate or do this visualization for a short period of time, it is okay to have the eyes closed. But if you're thinking of doing this meditation for a longer period of time, it is important that you keep the eyes open. And the reason for that is the longer we keep the eyes closed, the more likely it is that we fall asleep. Of course, initially, when we train in very short intervals. And gradually, as we become better at it, we increase more and more the time of our meditation, our visualization. So initially, because it will be short time, it's okay to have the eyes closed. Okay, but as you increase the time, your eyes should be open. And then the way that you direct your eyes, how it is described in the text, is like direct your eyesight towards your nose. And that means that you're looking downwards. Okay, you're not focusing at the tip of the nose. You're just looking downwards. So as you're looking downwards, it is important to clear up the space in front of you, right? You don't want to have many objects, because if you're looking downwards and you see all these different objects, different shapes, different colors, this is going to distract you. So get rid of all these objects. You should be looking, let's say, at an empty surface as you're gazing downwards. Okay. Now, having talked in general about the posture, it is important that you do not force your body, your arms, your legs, your head, and so forth in any tense or uncomfortable position. It should be a relaxed posture. Okay, so now you're sitting in a relaxed way, and it's time to establish your visualization. The visualization of Buddha Shakyamuni should be established at the level of your eyebrows. And it is in front of you in a distance of, let's say, about the length of your body. Okay. So it would be nice if you had a throne and a lotus as a basis, as a seat upon which Buddha Shakyamuni is sitting. So, for example, if you look at the statues of Buddha Shakyamuni, you will see how there is usually a throne and a lotus under the body of the Buddha. Okay, so try to visualize something like this. But initially, then the next thing is the size of this visualization. The size is not standard. For some people, it is best if they have a visualization of the small body. For some, it is better if they visualize something big. For some, it works better if you visualize something which is like the human size. So it is whatever suits you better in terms of the size of the visualization. Initially, we are not very good at understanding the colors and the shapes. We don't know those things. And therefore, it is very important to spend some time studying or practicing, coming to understand the details. And the way that we do this is by looking again and again, paying close attention to a statue of Buddha Shakyamuni or a picture of Buddha Shakyamuni. So, for example, you could have a picture of Buddha Shakyamuni or a picture of a statue in your mobile phone and look at it again and again, because the more you look at it, you will pick up different details. Okay, so now we come to the important thing, which is how do we visualize this? We say that you can use a photograph, but that doesn't mean that your visualization should be flat like a photograph. It should be 3D. All right, so just as the human body has dimensions, all 3 dimensions, therefore also your visualization should be 3D. And the most important thing is that it radiates light. We have said before that it looks like a human body. However, it doesn't have flesh and bones the same way that our body have this material aspect. This should be almost like a hologram that it radiates light. Okay. The other elements are that, for example, you shouldn't think that it is made out of copper and so forth, because if you use a statue as your training object, you might start visualizing something made of copper, but it shouldn't be like this, and it shouldn't be human flesh. Okay, so it's hologram, it radiates light. Now, sometimes if you can visualize that body as having a certain heaviness, this can help you overcome distraction or your mind being scattered. There is another technique that is very important to avoid being distracted. So before you start your session, you spend 1 second or whatever, and you set up your intention and you say, this is going to be, let's say, a 2-minute session or a 5-minute session. And during those 5-minute sessions, I will not allow my mind to be distracted. So set your intention from the beginning, because if you start the session and then in the session you find, your mind has gone everywhere, by the time you become aware and you think, oh, I have been distracted, it's already too late. All right, so we only have 7 minutes left. We will spend 1 minute in doing this visualization. So please engage this visualization for a minute. And then after this, we will have questions and answers. Okay, so we didn't have very much time to go through this visualization of the body of Buddha Shakyamuni, but we touched upon it, and Rinpoche has already talked about the causes for establishing refuge, which is fear and faith. And Rinpoche is advising you that until you meet again in the next class, you spend some time thinking about these issues that have come up in the class. And when you say you spend some time thinking and analyzing, please do not force this analysis. Do not think that it has to be intense, that it has to be for a very long time, and so forth. It is very good not to force those things, but instead to be relaxed and do them for a short period of time. And in this way, train yourself little by little. And the more you train yourself, the more you have the ability to do it for longer, to do it with more intensity, and so forth. Otherwise, there is always the danger that you are causing harm to your body and also to your mind. And this can be unpleasant. Okay, so that's the general advice. And now there is time for a question related to what we have been discussing here. So Rinpoche was saying that for the subjects that we have covered, such as, for example, the causes of refuge, which is fear and faith, and also the visualization of the body of Buddha Shakyamuni, these are things that you should continue during the week to train yourself in those things. And when we meet again, we can have the opportunity for questions. For example, you can say, when I tried to do the visualization, I had this and this difficulty, or this worked, or this didn't work, and so forth. It is very important to continue training on properly establishing the causes for going for refuge, that fear and that faith. But if, let's say, you have some blockage, or if it is not happening for you, the absolute minimum you should try to train yourself in is to have that visualization of the body of Buddha Shakyamuni, the image of Buddha Shakyamuni. The reason for that is, as we mentioned in the quotation of the sutra, there is a great benefit even in just meeting, visualizing, venerating the body of the Buddha. So this creates incredible amount of merit, and it can be a great benefit at time of hardship and difficulty. However, Rinpoche was saying, as with everything, always look at the highest, always look at the best. So, for example, when you go shopping, you don't look for the worst quality. First of all, you look for the best quality, which will also be the most expensive. And then you might consider, something of lesser quality or something which is cheaper. But you start with the best, isn't it? So also, with your practice and with your training, you should always aim for the highest, for the best. Okay, so you need to continue to train, aiming for the best. And, if you cannot have this, we have an absolute minimum, which is the visualization of the body of the Buddha. Okay, all right, so questions.
Thank you, Rinpoche, for your teaching. I've got a question on refuge. So if a person has taken refuge, but has not given up reliance on worldly gods for wealth, for protection.
Can you speak up a bit? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. If a person have taken refuge, but
Yes.
have not given up reliance on gods for, for protection, for wealth, maybe due to the family praying to that particular god. So will this reliance render the refuge invalid?
Okay, so thank you for the question, because actually it's a spot on the issue of refuge. And Rinpoche was saying this is something I have referred to as a secondary remark in one of my previous teachings, where I said that if actually you are aiming or you have the aspiration to reach the state of liberation, then you definitely need all three objects of refuge. You have no other hope but relying on the three objects of refuge to obtain liberation. However, temporarily, we might seek refuge in other things. So, for example, when you seek, it is appropriate to say that you go for refuge to your doctor. You seek refuge in your doctor. When it is very hot, you seek refuge in the shade, under a tree or in a building, and so forth. When you're thirsty, you seek refuge in water. So we have to understand that there is such a thing as temporarily taking refuge or looking for the assistance or protection from a situation. And you can see also within the Buddhist practice, often we engage in practices such as making offerings and tormas to the nagas or to different spirits and so forth. So you might say, what is happening here? It's not that we give away our absolute faith in the capacity of the three objects of refuge, but we recognize that under the three objects of refuge, there are other beings, such as, for example, the nagas or spirits who live in the trees and so forth, or there are other local deities that can befriend us, or if we befriend them and we give them food and we make other types of presents and offerings to them, they can help us immediately. So, to give you an example, let's say you are very highly connected. You know the prime minister of the country, or you know the president of the country. All right. So you have that connection. And one day you are driving and you break one of the rules, and a traffic policeman stops you and they give you a fine. Okay. So now you have this ticket for speeding or whatever violation you have done. And you're thinking, oh, well, I know the prime minister. Maybe I can call the office of the prime minister to take away the speeding fine. But actually, if you did that, it would take it's a very big hassle for a very small matter. It would be much smarter to approach, if you knew someone in the ticketing office, someone who directly deals with those traffic violations, because they have more authority, they will act immediately, and it will be of great benefit. So even though you know the prime minister, it's not the smartest thing to go to the prime minister for that. So temporarily, you take refuge in someone who is on the ticketing office, if you can do that. So it's like this with our refuge. With our refuge, we never forsake our faith in the total ability of the three objects of refuge. However, we recognize that, let's say, in this country, in this place, in this location, there are other gods and deities. And if we can make offerings to them, we can ask for a favor. And it might be quick. And that's a smart way to act. Thank you. We have gone over time. So that's it.